Earth-shattering news hits Formula One. Lewis Hamilton walks away from his Ferrari contract effective immediately to join Red Bull. Stay with us to uncover the explosive reasons behind this stunning switch, a move that will be remembered as one of the most shocking betrayals Ferrari has ever endured in the sport's history. Subscribe only if you want to stay updated with the latest breaking news about F1 races. It all began in silence. Not with official announcements or bombshell press releases, but in clandestine encounters, brief glances in marble hotel corridors, hushed exchanges inside private paddock lounges, and encrypted whispers carried through untraceable digital lines. There, in the underbelly of Formula One's glittering spectacle, where multi-million-dollar decisions are made in the blink of an eye, a quiet revolution was brewing. A revolution that had one name at its center: Lewis Carl Davidson Hamilton. The most decorated driver in the history of the sport, a living legend who had conquered records, rewritten what it meant to be elite, and transcended motorsport entirely, was restless. He had grown disillusioned, not with the racing itself, but with something more elusive, more poisonous: favoritism, politics, betrayal. In 2025, Hamilton was entering the second phase of his Ferrari chapter, a phase he had once imagined would elevate his name to immortal status. He hadn't come to Maranello for a farewell tour or a comfortable paycheck. He had come to do what only one man before him had done: restore Ferrari's crown and lead the prancing horse to glory. He came for destiny, for legacy, for magic. But from the very start, it felt off. At the surface, it was all red carpets and ceremonial handshakes. Headlines celebrated the pairing. Fans erupted in awe. Social media exploded with dreams of Hamilton and Ferrari crushing the grid. But beneath that glittering surface, inside the garage, inside the briefings, something was fundamentally broken. Ferrari, it turned out, already had its chosen one. Subscribe only if you want to stay updated with the latest breaking news about F1 races. Charles Leclerc, the Monégasque prodigy, the pride of the Ferrari Driver Academy, the poster boy of the team's future, was no longer just a teammate. He was the gravitational center of the Scuderia. From marketing materials to strategy meetings, everything orbiting around Maranello's sun revolved around Charles. And Hamilton? He was the moon, visible, respected, admired, but ultimately eclipsed. At first, it was subtle, easily dismissible. Minor differences. A new rear wing appeared in Leclerc's garage before Lewis's. A floor upgrade installed 2 weekends early, but only for Charles. Revised suspension kinematics that, curiously, enhanced the aggressive turn-in behavior Leclerc preferred. Tiny decisions. Marginal changes. But Hamilton, a driver whose precision is almost unnerving, noticed everything. He always does. He raised questions. Measured, professional, and behind closed doors. The engineers responded with data and smiles. The team bosses nodded solemnly, assuring him that everything was fair. But nothing changed. If anything, the gap widened. Leclerc's setup sheets became default templates. His preferences, from throttle mapping to aerodynamic balance, began shaping the car's DNA. And Hamilton? He adapted, as he always does. But the unease turned to frustration. He noticed the body language during debriefs. He saw which data runs the engineers prioritized. He observed how his race suggestions were placed into the wheel review that folder and rarely surfaced again. It was no longer just about racing. It was a war of influence. A fight not for points, but for power. The paddock noticed too. Rumors bubbled beneath the surface. Italian journalists hinted at tension in the red garage. Technical analysts pointed out how the car's behavior increasingly catered to Leclerc's inputs. Even Sky Sports began questioning Ferrari's development direction in post-race segments. But the tipping point came in Barcelona, a circuit Hamilton knew intimately, where driver skill and car synergy are everything. He felt dialed in, fast in practice, confident in setup. But overnight, a decision was made: his car would revert to an older rear suspension spec for stability reasons. Leclerc, meanwhile, retained the newer, more performant version. The result? Hamilton, visibly out of rhythm, qualified 8th. Leclerc? 2nd. Subscribe only if you want to stay updated with the latest breaking news about F1 races. There was no outburst, no headline-grabbing rant. Hamilton just walked past the media zone, head high, jaw tight. But for those who understood the sport, it was deafening. He was done asking, done waiting, done being patient. That very night, a discreet call was placed. Not to Ferrari management, not to Wolff, but to a high-level executive within Red Bull Racing's evolving leadership team. And here's where the unthinkable began to crystallize. Christian Horner, the team principal who had defined Red Bull's rise, was gone. Ousted in a whirlwind of controversies, politics, and deep-rooted tension with Helmut Marko. The leadership vacuum had destabilized the once unshakable empire. And with Max Verstappen beginning to voice subtle discontent over the team's direction, Red Bull was entering a phase of self-preservation. They needed a stabilizer, a leader, a name that could both anchor and electrify their next era. Enter Hamilton. What was once dismissed as fantasy now gained traction. Red Bull insiders began openly discussing the potential. Technical director Pierre Wache, long fascinated by Hamilton's technical precision, pushed hard behind the scenes. Marketing teams salivated at the idea of uniting Verstappen and Hamilton, the two titans of their generation, in one garage. And perhaps most intriguingly, newer Red Bull stakeholders saw Hamilton not just as a driver, but as a cultural weapon. A brand. A force. Meanwhile, back in Ferrari, panic started to simmer. They had underestimated him. They assumed Hamilton would endure silently, bound by tradition and the allure of the Scuderia badge. But Hamilton wasn't there for nostalgia. He was there for domination. And when he felt cornered, he didn't crumble. He calculated. He moved. Leclerc, for all his talent, felt the heat too. His radio messages grew more tense. At Silverstone, when a strategy call blatantly favored him at Hamilton's expense, Charles hesitated before accepting it. The crowd booed. Ferrari tried to spin it. But the truth was out. The fans saw the favoritism. The media called it out. And Hamilton, he just smiled. He knew he had leverage now. Red Bull began quietly aligning upgrades with his preferences, should he arrive. Simulator teams were instructed to trial settings suited to Hamilton's smoother, energy-efficient style. Former Mercedes engineers were contacted. Private meetings were scheduled during race weekends under the guise of marketing discussions. And as every race passed, Hamilton's performances became more pointed, more aggressive. He pushed the car past its limits, managed strategies independently, outqualified Leclerc 3 weekends in a row. Fans online noticed. Trending hashtags. Rumors exploded. Hamilton to Red Bull. Ferrari fracture deepens. Leclerc threatened by Hamilton's resurgence. Now, as the paddock braces for the season's climax, the air is electric with possibility. The idea of Lewis Hamilton, the man Red Bull once mocked, the man who once stood as the ideological opposite of their system, donning the blue overalls, is no longer outrageous. It's strategic, tactical, inevitable. And if it happens, it won't be a mere team change. It will be a statement, a declaration of vengeance, of unfinished business, of rewriting the end of his story on his terms. Because Lewis Hamilton is not just racing anymore. He's reclaiming control. He's tearing down favoritism. He's forcing teams to remember that he doesn't play by their rules, he makes his own. And Formula One, it holds its breath. Because the moment Lewis Hamilton makes his move, nothing in this sport will ever be the same again. Beneath the surface of Ferrari's polished PR facade, beneath the flashy photo shoots, the equal drivers' soundbites, and the carefully scripted social media posts, a storm had been brewing for months. While the world watched the red cars fly across circuits from Melbourne to Montreal, something far more dramatic was unfolding behind closed doors at Maranello. Charles Leclerc, once touted as a promising talent, had transformed into something far more powerful, the face of the future. The chosen one. The strategic centerpiece of Ferrari's long-term vision. Within the team, the shift wasn't just evident, it was undeniable. Leclerc was receiving layers of access, attention, and support that extended well beyond what could be chalked up to coincidence. He wasn't just favored, he was being fortified, empowered, protected. The garage staff no longer whispered about it, they acknowledged it with subtle shrugs and silent glances. Ferrari had made its choice, and it was no longer pretending otherwise. For Lewis Hamilton, the realization came gradually. At first, the differences were so minor they could be brushed aside. Slight tweaks in run plans, brief delays in data sharing, cancelled simulator sessions. But over time, those small inconsistencies hardened into an unmistakable pattern. And Hamilton, a veteran of team politics, a master of nuance, saw exactly what was happening, even if no one dared to admit it out loud. The simulator, arguably the most critical tool for pre-race development and fine-tuning, became a battleground of invisible power. Leclerc was being granted long, private simulator sessions, sometimes off-schedule and unannounced. Ferrari's top engineers, aerodynamic specialists, and strategic leads would join him to dissect every upcoming upgrade in excruciating detail. These weren't just driving exercises, they were tactical summits, personalized meetings disguised as technical work. Hamilton, meanwhile, was told the simulator was overbooked or down for maintenance. His requests were either pushed back or never confirmed. When he pressed for answers, he received vague responses, travel clashes, resource limitations, "We'll look into it next week." But next week never came. And he wasn't naive. He knew favoritism when he saw it. And this wasn't just favoritism. This was systemic. In engineering meetings, the divide was even more apparent. When Lewis shared feedback about corner exit instability, about mid-speed understeer, about unpredictable tire performance on long stints, the response was muted. Eyes darted elsewhere. Fingers tapped keyboards. No follow-up questions. No sense of urgency. But when Leclerc spoke, the room came alive. Engineers leaned forward. Graphs appeared on screens within seconds. Discussions lasted 20 minutes. Suggestions turned into immediate action points. Hamilton's input had become background noise. Leclerc's was gospel. And then came the breaking point. Monaco. If Formula One has a cathedral, it is Monte Carlo. Narrow, punishing, and dripping with prestige, the Monaco Grand Prix is not won with horsepower. It's conquered with courage, precision, and trust. For Hamilton, this was more than a race. It was his opportunity to shake the foundations of the sport. To remind everyone, the team, the media, the fans, that he wasn't finished. That he was still the most complete driver in the paddock. He arrived in Monaco prepared. Physically sharp. Mentally laser-focused. He'd studied data, replayed on boards, trained relentlessly. He was all in. But from the moment he walked into the garage on Thursday morning, something felt off. Leclerc's side of the garage was buzzing with an unusual level of secrecy. Confidentiality tags on boxes. Engineers whispering behind laptops. New parts wrapped in protective foil. Hamilton noticed a fresh underfloor configuration being installed on Leclerc's car, the rumored next-gen aerodynamic package that Ferrari had been working on for months. He asked his race engineer for clarity. The answer was cold and short. "Your update's not ready yet. We're targeting Spain." It wasn't just disappointing. It was infuriating. Because Lewis had been told this same thing 2 weeks earlier. And 2 weeks before that. And now, standing at the most technical track on the calendar, he was going to war with outdated equipment, while Leclerc had the edge. Still, Hamilton did what champions do. He fought. He drove like a man possessed. In qualifying, he unleashed one of his finest laps in years, brushing the walls, braking late, maximizing every inch of the car's potential. It was surgical, brave, almost violent in its precision. When he crossed the line, the radio crackled, "Mega lap, Lewis. Absolutely stellar." But the leaderboard told a harsher story. P5. A few moments later, Leclerc crossed the line. Pole position. By over 3/10. The celebration in Leclerc's garage was euphoric. High fives, hugs, champagne flutes hidden behind closed doors. Charles gave a glowing interview to the media, praising the car, the team, the collective effort. But Hamilton wasn't fooled. He knew exactly why that gap existed, and it had nothing to do with driver performance. Back inside the garage, Hamilton sat in the post-qualifying debrief with his arms folded, jaw clenched, his expression unreadable. The engineers began presenting data. Lap deltas. Tire wear. Sector breakdowns. But they never mentioned the upgrade. They never acknowledged the blatant imbalance between the two cars. No one even tried. And then Lewis spoke. His voice was composed, low, but heavy with accusation. With disappointment. With fire. I can't compete with one hand tied behind my back. The silence that followed was deafening. No rebuttal. No apology. Just a vacuum of accountability. Some glanced at their screens. Others stared at the table. But the message had been delivered. Not just to the engineers. To the entire room. Hamilton wasn't just calling out an oversight. He was calling out the system. He had come to Ferrari to write history. To lift the team back into championship glory. To build something lasting. But now he realized something devastating. The structure wasn't built for him. The machine was already in motion, and he was no longer the centerpiece. He was becoming the accessory. The insurance policy. The secondary story. But Lewis Hamilton doesn't accept the role of supporting actor. Not quietly. Not without a fight. And certainly not when the world is watching. It was well past midnight in Barcelona. The city had fallen into its usual post-race hush, the adrenaline of the Spanish Grand Prix slowly dissipating into the night air, but inside a luxurious suite atop one of the city's most exclusive hotels, Lewis Hamilton was wide awake. Not from caffeine, not from celebration, but from a brewing storm inside him. The room was silent, the view vast, yet his thoughts were loud. Deafening, in fact. Another race. Another disappointment. Another seventh-place finish. Another moment where Charles Leclerc had been handed the superior strategy, again, without explanation, without justification, without any illusion of fairness. It was no longer an anomaly, it had become a routine. At this point, the favoritism was so clear, it didn't even sting. It enraged. 4 months now, Hamilton had bit his tongue. He had played the political game. Worn the corporate smile. Nodded through debriefs filled with hollow excuses and data spreadsheets weaponized to mask decisions made long before the lights even went out. But tonight, something snapped. Not with fury, but with clarity. A thunderous, blinding, irreversible clarity. He was done playing the loyal soldier. Without hesitation, Hamilton picked up his encrypted phone and fired off a discreet, highly calculated message to his personal manager. Someone he trusted with more than just business, but with secrets. Not a call. Not a voice memo. Just a single instruction. Reach out to Red Bull. Not Horner. The new bosses. Quietly. The implications were seismic. Not because of what the message said, but because of who it came from. A 7-time world champion, still razor-sharp, still obsessed with perfection, still haunted by the political betrayals of recent years, reaching across enemy lines not out of desperation, but ambition. Ruthless ambition. He didn't want to speak to Christian Horner, the man who had spent years subtly undermining him in the media. Horner was out of the equation, pushed aside by scandal, disgrace, and the shifting power dynamics inside the Red Bull empire. No, Lewis wanted to connect with the true architects of the team's future. Helmut Marko, the enigmatic mastermind behind the ruthless Red Bull Driver Academy, and Oliver Mintzlaff, the calculated corporate strategist who now had one eye on global brand image and the other on internal dominance. Red Bull was vulnerable, yet volatile, and that made them dangerous. Just how Hamilton liked it. In the weeks following Horner's sudden fall from grace, the Red Bull hierarchy was engaged in a quiet civil war. Internally, tensions with Max Verstappen's entourage had begun to escalate. Jos Verstappen, known for his confrontational style and obsessive influence over his son's career, had reportedly started pushing for structural changes. Rumors were swirling. Verstappen was entertaining discussions with Audi for 2026. Mercedes had quietly left the door open for a blockbuster return. Even Aston Martin had allegedly reached out. The Verstappen dynasty, once immovable, now seemed fragile. And Hamilton saw it before anyone else. He wasn't looking for a retirement ride. He was looking to dismantle an empire, and then rebuild it around himself. The following month became a masterclass in covert negotiation. No leaks. No whispers. No plane spotting from overeager fans. Only encrypted calls, non-disclosure agreements, secure video conferences, and private meetings masked as charity events or fashion appearances. Red Bull's top-level executives didn't want the media attention, not yet. What they wanted was leverage. A contingency plan. A king to replace their king. Hamilton laid out his terms with surgical precision. He wanted complete equality with any future teammate, non-negotiable. Technical transparency on all upgrades, from chassis evolutions to aero tweaks. Full access to simulator programs. Direct influence on power unit development. Input on race strategy structures. A complete overhaul of the internal culture to ensure no subtle or subconscious favoritism. He even demanded veto power over key strategic hires, especially anyone who might be planted by the Verstappen camp. And Red Bull, they didn't blink. They were all ears. Because Hamilton wasn't just a driver. He was a message. A symbol of defiance. A chess move that would force Mercedes and Ferrari into a corner. A globally recognizable, battle-hardened champion with unfinished business and an army of fans who still believed he'd been robbed in Abu Dhabi, and never truly vindicated since. Red Bull, ever the marketing juggernaut, saw beyond the racing surface. They saw Hamilton in their colors and imagined headlines across every major continent. More than that, they saw control. With Max's camp increasingly volatile and vocal, with Joss demanding influence over engineering staff and Verstappen himself reportedly unhappy with internal political reshuffling post-Horner, Hamilton represented not just security, but structure, discipline, professionalism, gravitas. In short, Hamilton was everything Verstappen wasn't willing to be anymore. And while the world fixated on silly season rumors, on whether Carlos Sainz would move to Audi, or if Lando Norris might jump ship, the real bombshell was already halfway written in ink. Internal Red Bull memos described the potential deal as legacy warfare. It wasn't about points. It wasn't about 2025. It was about rewriting the power narrative in Formula One for the next 5 years. Red Bull wasn't content to be the Max Verstappen show anymore. They wanted to own the stage, no matter who stood on it. Hamilton's representatives even pushed for crossover brand synergies. Red Bull's extreme sports division. Humanitarian partnerships. Fashion collaborations. Electric vehicle tech sharing. The deal, if finalized, would be the most culturally explosive driver-team alignment since Ayrton Senna. And through it all, Hamilton remained calm. Calculated. Clinical. Because he wasn't joining Red Bull to drive. He was joining Red Bull to lead. To dominate. To end the narrative that he was finished. To silence every doubter who had ever written him off. To prove, on enemy turf, that he was still the most complete, most dangerous, most politically sharp driver Formula One had ever seen. And when the handshake finally happened, quietly, in a nondescript villa in southern France, it wasn't met with champagne or fireworks. It was met with a mutual nod. A shared smirk. Because both sides knew, this wasn't the end of anything. It was the beginning of war. Let me know if you want the next chapter, the announcement, the fallout, Verstappen's reaction, and the chaos it unleashes in the paddock. The motorsport world didn't see it coming. Not the media. Not the engineers. Not even the most die-hard insiders whispering in paddock corners. Because this wasn't a typical contract signing. This was a seismic realignment. A strategic coup. A game-changing power shift. Lewis Hamilton, the 7-time world champion, the icon of endurance, legacy, and supremacy, has officially joined forces with Red Bull Racing for the 2026 season. The move isn't just monumental. It's transformative. And it was orchestrated in near-total darkness. Behind closed hotel doors in Zurich, far away from the flashing cameras and relentless speculation of the Formula One circus, a historic meeting took place on July 30, 2025. No leaks. No slip-ups. No cryptic tweets. Just a chilling, calculated calm. Christian Horner, Helmut Marko, and Hamilton himself, no agents, no entourage, sat in a private suite and inked the deal with pens, not keyboards. There were no digital signatures. No paper trails on cloud drives. Just ink, silence, and destiny. At Ferrari, Hamilton had battled with tradition. The Italian giants had welcomed him as a messiah but treated him like a figurehead. Charles Leclerc was their golden child, their project, their future. Every aerodynamic update, every suspension calibration, every steering tweak seemed to orbit around Leclerc's driving profile. Despite Hamilton's unparalleled resume, he was forced to adapt. Compromise. Fit into someone else's mold. But Red Bull, they handed him the clay. Not only did they want Hamilton's speed, they wanted his insight, his experience, his battle scars. Red Bull didn't just offer him a car, they gave him influence, authorship, and authority. It was a tectonic shift in design philosophy. 4 years, Red Bull's design team, led by the legendary Adrian Newey and executed through aerodynamic chief Enrico Bulba, had built machines tailored to Max Verstappen's aggressive, razor-sharp style. The cars were quick but twitchy, responsive but ruthless, alive in the hands of a driver with the reflexes of a fighter pilot. But now, everything changes. Enrico Bulba has reportedly been reassigned with a personal directive: reconstruct the 2026 Red Bull Challenger to fit Hamilton's driving DNA. That means an emphasis on smoother corner entries, enhanced braking stability, less snappy rear-end rotation, and a chassis that whispers through apexes instead of screaming. More mid-corner traction. Predictable turn-in. A dance partner, not a bull to tame. Internally, the engineering team has dubbed it Project Legacy, a nod to the belief that Hamilton's next championship could become the most iconic in Formula One history. The objective: build the first car in Red Bull's history not just for dominance, but for immortality. Then, without warning, the silence shattered. August 1, 2025, 10:03 a.m. Central European Time. Lewis Hamilton signs with Red Bull for 2026. That headline didn't just trend, it ignited. Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, Reddit, Discord, all detonated under the pressure. Thousands of posts per minute. Millions of impressions within an hour. What became the most typed word on Google globally? Fans screamed. Journalists collapsed into chaos. PR departments scrambled. Teams went into emergency meetings. The sport tilted on its axis. Ferrari fans were inconsolable. They had painted murals, written ballads, dared to believe that Hamilton would restore the glory of Maranello. Instead, they watched him vanish in the night. Some labeled it betrayal, others resignation. But all agreed on one thing: this was the end of a dream. Red Bull fans were split. One camp exploded in jubilation. The other froze, stunned by the implications. How could Max and Lewis share a garage? Would it be nuclear? Would it even be possible? Was this the end of an era, or the start of an apocalypse? Max Verstappen. No press statement. No tweet. Just a single post on his Instagram story, a photo of his 2021 championship trophy with the caption, "Never forget." But Lewis Hamilton fans? They lit the internet on fire. They had waited through the dark Mercedes days. They had cried through Abu Dhabi. They had suffered the false dawn of Ferrari. But now they saw the light. Their hero wasn't just returning to fight. He was returning with fire in his lungs, steel in his spine, and the fastest team on the grid behind him. This wasn't a comeback. This was a coronation in the making. Sources inside Red Bull suggest that Hamilton's influence is already in motion. Simulator sessions are being scheduled. Secret track tests are being negotiated. Aerodynamic overlays are being tweaked in the wind tunnel based on Hamilton's feedback. Engineers who once worked exclusively under Verstappen's driving telemetry are now being cross-trained to interpret Hamilton's smoother, more analytical style. And the political storm? It's brewing. Mercedes is said to be fuming. Ferrari executives are scrambling to control narrative collapse. Rumors swirl that Verstappen is weighing exit options after 2026, should internal dynamics sour. Meanwhile, sponsors are lining up for Red Bull's 2026 campaign like it's the Super Bowl. Inside the team, there's a silent buzz, a sense that they're building something historic. This isn't just about trophies. It's about mythology, about rewriting the script, about putting the name Lewis Hamilton in a place where it can never be reached again. The man himself? He spoke only once. At the end of the announcement. Calm. Deadly. Defiant. I've been waiting for the right moment. Now I write the ending. And with that, the world knew, Lewis Hamilton hadn't faded. He hadn't settled. He hadn't stopped believing. He had been preparing. 2026 won't be a season. It'll be a revolution. And it starts now. The moment the bombshell news broke, Ferrari descended into absolute disarray. What had been a fortress of tradition, legacy, and untouchable pride suddenly found itself at the epicenter of an emotional earthquake. Inside Maranello, the silence was deafening, not the calm kind, but the stunned, airless silence that follows a catastrophic betrayal. Insiders described scenes of sheer disbelief. Phone lines lit up. Senior engineers dropped tools mid-procedure. The air was thick with confusion and denial. This wasn't just a shock, it was devastation. Team principal Frédéric Vasseur, blindsided and visibly shaken, wasted no time. He called an unscheduled all-hands meeting, mobilizing the highest levels of Ferrari's chain of command, from top aerodynamicists to media strategists and upper-tier executives. Panic swirled through every corner of the facility. How could this have happened? How had they misread the signs? How had they allowed the most decorated driver in modern history to walk, no storm, out of their gates and straight into the arms of their most hated adversary? Charles Leclerc, Ferrari's homegrown hero, their prodigy-turned-franchise face, refused to face the cameras. He ignored reporters, sidestepped questions, and reportedly left the headquarters without a word, avoiding eye contact with even the closest members of his inner circle. Those inside the team speak of an eerie quietness, not indifference, but shock-induced withdrawal. Leclerc may have sensed this storm was brewing, but no one, not even him, anticipated the magnitude of the detonation. What had been building in the shadows for months had finally erupted. And Ferrari, for all its history and prestige, had been caught totally unarmed. Because Lewis Hamilton didn't just leave. He defected. And not to just any team, but to the one Ferrari had waged war against for nearly a decade, Red Bull Racing. The Red Bull of Verstappen. The Red Bull of 2021. The Red Bull that had haunted their dreams and humiliated them in their own backyard. It wasn't just a transfer. It was a message. A statement. A thunderclap across the paddock. According to multiple individuals close to Hamilton's camp, this was not a decision rooted in contracts, numbers, or spreadsheets. This was deeply emotional, the culmination of 2 years of quiet frustration, professional isolation, and growing disillusionment. At Ferrari, he had arrived as a titan, a living legend with aspirations of carving his final chapter in scarlet. He envisioned a renaissance, one last symphonic push for glory under the Tifosi's adoration. Instead, what he received was an identity crisis. Hamilton felt minimized. His voice, once central to team strategy, became a whisper. His vision was often overridden. He was promised reverence, but handed restraint. The culture, the politics, the priorities, all began to feel suffocating. The red suit no longer felt like armor, it felt like a straitjacket. And with each missed podium, each strategic misstep, each media narrative that painted him as the aging mentor to Leclerc's rising star, the walls closed in further. And then came the silence. No real apologies. No major course corrections. Just more quiet detachment. So Hamilton did what legends do when pushed too far. He chose to rewrite his own story. His move to Red Bull isn't a mere career extension. It's a renaissance. A power move. A psychological lightning bolt that changes not just his destiny, but the very structure of Formula One itself. And it brings with it a storm of questions so explosive, so chaotic, that the entire sport is bracing for impact. How will Max Verstappen react? How do you place two apex predators under the same roof and expect peace? Will Christian Horner pull off the impossible, managing two of the fiercest competitors of the modern age without triggering all-out warfare within the team? Or has he unknowingly created a supernova of ego and ambition destined to tear Red Bull apart from the inside? Early whispers suggest Verstappen was blindsided. Some say he was only notified hours before the news broke publicly. Others hint at growing resentment, with Verstappen questioning his future at a team that just altered the hierarchy without consulting its current king. Tensions are already smoldering beneath the surface. The 2026 season may not just be a championship battle. It may be a civil war on 4 wheels. And yet, none of that seems to faze Hamilton. Those who've spoken to him describe a man reborn, fueled not by vengeance, but by purpose. He sees this not as an ending, but a rebirth. He isn't just trying to win races. He's aiming to immortalize himself. To break the unbreakable. to destroy the myths that age limits greatness. He's not chasing points anymore, he's chasing eternity. And if he pulls it off, if he conquers Red Bull from within, topples Verstappen on equal machinery, and leads the team into the next regulation era with dominance, it will be the most extraordinary, cinematic, and unforgiving final act in Formula One history. It won't just be redemption. It'll be a revolution. Because he didn't walk away from Ferrari as a quitter. He walked away as a man no longer willing to be underestimated. Ferrari promised him legend. Red Bull offered him freedom. Now, the world watches, breathless, as the most unpredictable, combustible, thrilling storyline in the sport's recent memory unfolds in real time. Every lap will be a statement. Every overtake a declaration of war. Every podium a shot across the bow of the team he left behind. He came to Ferrari for triumph. He left for transcendence. And now, in 2026, the legend of Lewis Hamilton is no longer being written in red. It's being carved, in fire, into the heart of Formula One.